The limousine driver has been sitting outside this gate for 14 minutes. He's pressed the intercom button so many times his finger is numb. The white Bronco that's always in this driveway always isn't there. He's walked around the property. He's called the phone number twice. Nothing. It's almost 11 o'clock on a Sunday night in one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Los Angeles, and the most famous passenger he's ever been hired to drive is just gone. And then a light comes on inside the house. Then another. A large man appears at the front door, moving down toward the gate, turning lights on as he walks. He looks flustered. He tells the driver he accidentally overslept. 2 miles away, a woman and a man she barely knew are lying dead on a stone walkway. I have been deep in this case for a long time, longer than I planned. I thought I knew it, most of us think we know it, because it's been everywhere for 30 years. Documentaries, podcasts, FX miniseries, anniversary specials. I thought I had it figured out. And then I actually sat down and went through everything, every piece of evidence, every transcript, every interview, every court document from 1994 all the way up to 2025. And something happened that I didn't expect. The noise fell away, and what I was left with was two people, a woman who'd been trying to build a life for herself, a young man who was just doing someone a favor. Their names are Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. And I think the way this case has been covered for 3 decades has buried them a second time under everything else. So we're going to do this differently today. We're going to actually know these two people, and then we're going to go through what happened, all of it, including the parts that will make your jaw drop. And then we're going to pull back and look at something even bigger, something that goes way beyond one trial in LA. Quick heads up before we start. There is graphic violence in this video and detailed discussion of domestic abuse. I'm going to be honest about what happened because I think Nicole and Ron deserve that honesty. If you need to step away at any point, please do. For everyone else, stay with me on this one. Nicole Brown was born on May 19th, 1959, in Frankfurt, West Germany. Her dad Lou was an American serviceman stationed there. Her mom Juditha was German. They'd met and married in Switzerland after the war. Nicole was the second of 4 daughters. The family eventually settled in Garden Grove, California. Suburban, sunny, the kind of place you grow up knowing everyone on your street. She was, by every account of everyone who knew her, someone you remembered. Not vaguely specifically, her laugh. The way she was with her friends. The loyalty. Her sister Denise described her, 30 years after her death, as someone who was just so vivacious, so full of life. That's not a memorial cliche. That's a specific true thing said by a woman who has spent 3 decades turning her grief into action. Nicole graduated from Dana Hills High School. She was 18 years old when she first encountered OJ Simpson. She was working a shift at a private club in Beverly Hills called the Daisy. He was 29, one of the most famous men in the country, and he was still married to his first wife. He pursued her relentlessly. She was 18 and being chased by someone with that much fame and attention, she got swept up in it. That is an honest description of what happened. After his divorce was finalized in 1979, they continued the relationship. On February 2nd, 1985, Nicole Brown and OJ Simpson got married. She was 25, he was 37. They had 2 children, Sydney Brooke, born in October 1985, and Justin Ryan, born in 1988. They moved into a large estate on Rockingham Avenue in Brentwood. From the outside, it looked like a fairy tale. Famous husband, beautiful wife, 2 kids, one of the most recognizable addresses in Los Angeles. But Nicole was keeping records. I need you to really sit with that for a second, because it tells you something important about what life was actually like inside that fairy tale. She kept a diary. She kept photographs of her injuries. She stored letters and documentation in a safe deposit box at a bank. And she told her sister Denise exactly where that box was, what was in it, and where to find the key. You don't do that unless part of you is preparing for something you don't want to think about directly. The documented incidents of abuse spanned the entire relationship. 62 reported incidents across the years they were together. 62. On New Year's Day, 1989, a neighbor called 911 after hearing screaming from the Rockingham estate. Officers arrived and found Nicole with visible injuries, bruised, cut marks on her body. OJ was present. The officers gave him what amounted to a professional courtesy and left without arresting him. The case eventually went to court, and OJ pleaded no contest to spousal battery. He was sentenced to community service. No jail. He was back to his normal life within weeks. Nicole filed for divorce in February 1992, citing years of documented abuse. The settlement gave her $433,750 as a lump sum, $10,000 a month in child support. She moved out. She got her own place. She drove a Ferrari. She started building something that was actually hers. In January 1994, she bought a townhouse at 875 South Bundy Drive in Brentwood. 3 stories, 3,400 square feet, Mediterranean facade, multiple patios, a rooftop sun deck, a mile and a half from OJ's estate. She paid $652,000 for it. It was hers. The people who knew Nicole in those months described something happening to her that they struggled to put into words. Her sister Denise said Nicole was finally able to have her own friends. They were making actual plans. Camping at Yosemite, taking the kids to Club Med in the summer, doing things that had always been on an internal list but never arrived. Sydney was 8. Justin was 5. Nicole was 34 years old, and she was more herself than she had been in years. The day before she died, Nicole was on the phone with her close friend Kris Jenner, making plans for lunch. Nicole told her she had something important she wanted to talk about. Something about OJ. Something she'd been wanting to say. They made plans for the next day. Nicole Brown Simpson never made it to that lunch. Now, I have to tell you about Ron Goldman, because the way this case gets covered almost always shortchanges him. And that's not right. Ronald Lyle Goldman was born on July 2nd, 1968, in suburban Illinois. He moved to Los Angeles to pursue modeling and acting, the same dream that pulls thousands of young people to that city every year. He was 25. He was paying his bills by waiting tables at a Brentwood restaurant called Mezzaluna. By every single account from people who worked with him there, Ron was the person who made the shift better just by showing up. Charming, genuinely warm, the kind of guy who remembered things about people. Through Mezzaluna, he and Nicole had become friends over the weeks before her death. Just friends. And that matters a lot, because what happened to Ron on the night of June 12th had absolutely nothing to do with any choice he made. He was in the wrong place because he was being kind. Here's the specific thing. Nicole's mother, Juditha, had left her glasses at Mezzaluna during a family dinner that evening. She called the restaurant. Ron happened to be finishing his shift. He heard about the glasses. He volunteered to drop them off at Nicole's place on his way home. He put them in an envelope. He got in his car. Ron Goldman was 25 years old and going out of his way to do someone a favor. 9 days before the murders, Nicole wrote in her diary about a phone call with OJ. She documented him saying, "You hang up on me last night, you're going to pay for this bitch." She wrote it down, just like she'd written everything down for years. And separately, she had told Kris Jenner directly that OJ had told her he would kill her and get away with it because he was OJ Simpson. She said this to people who remembered it clearly, months before it happened. Now, let me show you what OJ's world looked like in the same period, running in parallel. Orenthal James Simpson was born on July 9th, 1947, in the Potrero Hill neighborhood of San Francisco. Working class, predominantly black by the 1950s. His father left when OJ was young. His mother, Eunice, raised 4 kids largely on her own. As a toddler, OJ contracted rickets, a bone disease that left his legs badly bowed. His mother made makeshift leg braces from metal scraps. Kids at school called him pencil pins. He fell in with a gang called the Persian Warriors in his early teens. Arrests, juvenile trouble, time in a detention facility. His future looked genuinely uncertain. And then, baseball legend Willie Mays sat down with the kid. He told him directly that he was wasting something and needed to stop. OJ listened. He channeled everything into football. By the time he left USC, he was arguably the best college football player anyone had ever seen. He won the 1,968 Heisman Trophy unanimously. The Buffalo Bills drafted him first overall in 1969. In 1973, he became the first player in NFL history to rush for more than 2,000 yards in a single season. He still holds the single-season yards per game average record. 5 Pro Bowls. And then he became something even larger than a football player, the face of Hertz, the film actor, the television personality. He was uniquely for a black man in that era of American corporate culture, universally embraced across racial lines. He was warm, he was approachable, he had made himself into a brand, and everything he touched turned to gold. By 1994, the football was long over, but the fame remained. He had a girlfriend named Paula Barbieri. He also had a documented pattern of behavior toward Nicole that had not stopped when the marriage ended. He called constantly. He showed up at her house. He stood outside her window on multiple occasions. The calls Nicole made to police in the years after the divorce numbered in the dozens. On October 25th, 1993, 8 months before the murders, Nicole called 911 twice in a single night. In the second call, she's barely whispering while a man's voice thunders in the background. She tells the dispatcher he broke down her back door. The dispatcher asks if he's threatening her. "He's gonna beat the shit out of me." That's what she said. OJ's voice is audible the entire time. When the call was played publicly in 1994, you could not hear it, and stay neutral. Now here's June 12th, 1994. Sidney Simpson had a dance recital that afternoon, a school performance that put Nicole and OJ in the same room. Multiple witnesses said OJ was visibly cold toward Nicole the entire time, barely acknowledging her, irritated, reportedly, by what she was wearing. After the recital, Nicole took her family to Mezzaluna for dinner. OJ was not invited. He went back to Rockingham. He and Cato Kalin went to McDonald's around 9 o'clock. Cato would later tell investigators that OJ was in an unusually dark mood, something sitting on him differently. They came back. Cato went to the guest house. OJ went inside. 9:36 p.m. Cato sees OJ standing outside near the main house. That is the last time anyone who is not OJ Simpson accounts for his whereabouts for the next 78 minutes, 10:02 p.m. A call goes from OJ's white Ford Bronco to Paula Barbieri's number, goes to voicemail. Somewhere between 10:15 and 10:30 p.m., the window, the medical examiner later establishes as the time of death, Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman are killed on the walkway outside her front door at 875 South Bundy Drive. Here is what that looked like. A screenwriter named Pablo Fenjvez, who lived nearby, heard Nicole's Akita barking in a persistent, agitated way starting around 10:15. Just before 11 o'clock, a man named Stephen Schwab was outside walking his own dog when the Akita joined him. He took the dog home. The fur on the dog's belly and paws was matted dark red. His neighbor, Sucru Bostepe, agreed to keep the dog overnight. The dog wouldn't settle. Bostepe and his partner decided to walk it. The dog pulled them directly to 875 South Bundy Drive. And then they saw what was at the end of that path. Nicole Brown Simpson was lying at the base of the front steps. She had been stabbed more than a dozen times. Her throat had been cut so deeply that her head was nearly severed from her body. Forensic analysis later established that the attacker stepped on her spine for leverage to deliver the final wound. Ron Goldman was a few feet away, slumped against the fence. His hands and arms bore defensive wounds he had fought back, hard. Stabbed in the torso, the neck, the thigh. A dark knit cap near his body. Blood everywhere. A trail of blood drops leading away from the scene, not Nicole's, not Ron's heading toward the back alley. Nicole's children were asleep upstairs. 10:40 p.m., limo driver Alan Park arrived at Rockingham to collect OJ for his flight to Chicago. He pressed the intercom. No answer. He looked at the driveway. The Bronco wasn't there. He rang again. Waited, walked around, called the number he had. Nothing. 10:54 p.m. A light comes on deep inside the main house. Then another. OJ Simpson appears at the front door, moving down toward the gate, turning lights on as he walks. He tells Alan Park he overslept. He grabs his bags, gets in the limousine, makes his flight to Chicago. 78 minutes. No alibi. No witnesses. A window that fits the time of death exactly. And he told the driver he overslept. Early morning, June 13th. Detectives Fuhrman, Lang, and Vanatter arrived at Rockingham at 5 a.m. They immediately noticed the white Bronco in the driveway. On the driver's door, a dark smear. Fuhrman noted it appeared to be blood. He climbed the fence to gain access to the property. Near the guest house, he found a leather glove, size extra large, Eris isotoner brand. Nicole Brown Simpson had purchased that exact style at Bloomingdale's in New York City in 1990 as a gift for OJ. The matching glove had been found at the murder scene on Bundy Drive. Same brand, same size, same purchase. Blood connecting both gloves to the murders. The forensic picture that assembled over the following days was, by any scientific standard, overwhelming. OJ's blood was in a trail at the crime scene. The victim's blood was found inside his Bronco, in his driveway, in his home, on a sock in his bedroom. DNA analysis placed the probability at 1 in 9.7 billion. For samples inside the Bronco, 1 in 21 billion. For blood on the bedroom sock, 1 in 6.8 billion. The bloody shoe prints at the scene matched a Bruno Magli Lorenzo, an Italian luxury shoe, size 12, OJ's size. Exactly 299 pairs of that shoe in that size had been sold in the entire United States. OJ had a fresh cut on his right hand that he explained differently every time he was asked about it. In Chicago, he said he cut it on broken glass after hearing about Nicole's death. Later, he said it happened before he left LA. The blood smear on the Bronco door was positioned exactly where someone with a cut on the right hand would press. On June 17th, a warrant was issued for his arrest. His attorneys negotiated an 11 a.m. surrender. The time passed. OJ was gone. His friend Robert Kardashian Kim, Courtney, and Chloe's father read a letter OJ had left behind at a press conference. The letter read like a goodbye note. Then came the Bronco. Al Cowlings called police dispatch from a moving car. OJ was in the back seat with a gun to his own head. He needed time. NBC was broadcasting the NBA Finals. Every network cut to split screen. The white Ford Bronco crawling at 35 miles per hour down the 405 freeway was watched live by 95 million Americans. People came out of their houses and gathered on overpasses. Some of them were holding signs that said, "Go OJ." Inside the Bronco, when it finally pulled into Rockingham, a passport, a fake mustache and beard, a loaded revolver, a large amount of cash, and a framed photograph of Nicole. After an hour of negotiation, he stepped out and surrendered. At his arraignment, when asked how he pleaded to 2 counts of murder, OJ Simpson said, "Absolutely, 100% not guilty." To understand the verdict that came next, you have to understand what Los Angeles was carrying into that courtroom. 3 years earlier, on March 3rd, 1991, a black man named Rodney King was pulled over by LAPD officers and beaten brutally on the ground for an extended period, while more than a dozen other officers watched. A neighbor filmed it. The entire thing was on video. In April 1992, all 4 officers were acquitted. Los Angeles erupted. 6 days of riots, 63 people killed, over $1 billion in property damage. The LAPD had been defined for decades by a pattern of documented racial brutality. The Rodney King verdict confirmed it. When a wealthy, famous black man was charged with murdering 2 white people, and the institution collecting the evidence was the same, LAPD, a substantial part of Los Angeles was not prepared to simply accept that evidence at face value. That is not irrational. That is lived experience speaking. And OJ Simpson understood exactly what room he was standing in. He assembled the dream team. Johnny Cochran, a courtroom force of nature with deep roots in the black community. Robert Shapiro, who led the early strategy. F. Lee Bailey, famous for cross-examinations that structurally dismantled witnesses. Barry Scheck, a DNA specialist. Robert Kardashian, who reactivated his bar license to stand beside his friend. The defense cost $6 million. The prosecution was led by Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden. Judge Lance Ito allowed a camera in the courtroom. The trial lasted 134 days. The jury was sequestered for 265 consecutive days, the longest in American history. At its peak, 150 million people watched the verdict live. The prosecution had DNA evidence, matching gloves, matching shoe prints, 62 documented incidents of abuse, a 911 call with Nicole's terrified whisper, a diary, photographs. a prior battery conviction. They believed they had this locked. They believed they had a man convicted by science and by history. Then came Mark Fuhrman. Fuhrman was the detective who found the glove at Rockingham. During cross-examination, F. Lee Bailey asked him directly, had he used a specific racial slur in the past 10 years? Fuhrman said no, under oath. The defense then produced 13 hours of audio recordings, interviews Fuhrman had given between 1,985 and 1,994. In those recordings, he used that word 41 times, described routine brutality against black suspects, referenced evidence manipulation as standard practice, his own voice, on tape, 41 times. You guys, I need a second with this. A woman was murdered. A young man doing someone a kindness was murdered. And the detective who found the most critical piece of evidence had spent years recording himself on tape saying things that made it impossible for a black jury in 1994 Los Angeles to separate the evidence from the institution. He had handed the defense exactly what they needed, on a silver platter. When Fuhrman was asked directly whether he had ever planted or manufactured evidence against OJ Simpson, he invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. He is the only person in the entire OJ Simpson case ever convicted of a crime. In 1996, he pleaded no contest to felony perjury, sentenced to 3 years probation, fined $200. In 2024, 30 years later, California formally decertified him from law enforcement. The prosecution made one more catastrophic mistake. Christopher Darden, by his own later account, warned the team not to ask OJ to try on the gloves. He was overruled. And so OJ stood before the jury, before the cameras, before 150 million people, and struggled to pull the gloves over his hands. The gloves had been soaked in blood and frozen in an evidence locker for over a year. Leather contracts significantly under those conditions. The rational explanation existed. But the image had already done its work. Johnny Cochran, in his closing argument, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. The jury began deliberating on October 2nd, 1995. 4 hours later, they had a verdict. 4 hours. After a 134-day trial, juror Carrie Bess stated publicly that roughly 90% of the jury voted to acquit as payback for Rodney King. Juror Lionel Cryer, who gave OJ a raised fist salute when the verdict was read, said in 2017 he would have voted guilty. Juror Anise Aschenbach, who initially voted guilty before changing her mind, said she regrets it. On October 3rd, 1995, 150 million people watched the verdict be read. Not guilty, on both counts. The country split in half along racial lines in real time. Both reactions were, in their own context, completely coherent. The two groups were not responding to the same question. Marcia Clark would say, years later, some jurors came in with the explicit purpose of sending a message. There was no way to reach that jury. There really wasn't. OJ walked out a free man. The entertainment industry cut him immediately. No endorsements, no roles, no invitations. The civil trial in 1996-97 found him liable for both deaths and ordered him to pay $33.5 million in damages. He paid almost none of it. He moved to Florida, where state law protected his home and his NFL pension. He received between $10,000 and $25,000 a month from that pension, untouchable by his creditors. He bought a house in a gated community south of Miami, played golf, kept an entourage, acted consistently like a man who had nothing to feel bad about. In November 2006, he tried to publish a book called If I Did It, Confessions of a Killer, framed as hypothetical, a walkthrough of how he would have committed the murders if he had committed them. The publisher pulled it within 10 days. A court awarded the rights to the Goldman family. They published it with one change the word. If printed so small, it was essentially invisible. At a glance, the title just read, I Did It. In 2018, Fox aired the interview footage. In it, OJ describes arriving at Nicole's condo with a fictional companion he calls Charlie, a confrontation that escalates, starting to describe a knife. And then, I don't remember, it was like I blacked out. He slips throughout, he catches himself, At one point, he mimes the act he's describing and laughs. He thought it was funny. OJ was diagnosed with prostate cancer in 2023. By early 2024, he could barely finish half a round of golf. His family announced hospice care. Between 30 and 50 people came to say goodbye in his final days. Every single one, family, friends, medical staff, was required to sign a non-disclosure agreement before entering the room. No cell phones allowed. OJ Simpson died on April 10, 2024. He was 76 years old. Fred Goldman issued a statement noting that OJ had died without paying the judgment and without ever acknowledging what the evidence showed. A person close to the family told a reporter that nothing had come up about the murders in the final conversations. The LA thing, this person said, nothing about the LA thing came up. Now I want to take a step back, because this story sits inside something much bigger, a pattern that I think is genuinely important. In February 2013, in Pretoria, South Africa, Oscar Pistorius shot his girlfriend Riva Steenkamp 4 times through a locked bathroom door on Valentine's Day. He was one of the most famous athletes on Earth, the Blade Runner, a double amputee Olympian. Riva was 29. Her last text to him included, "I'm scared of you sometimes and how you snap at me." Her phone was in the locked bathroom where she died. The lead detective contaminated the crime scene and was removed from the case. The first verdict acquitted Pistorius of murder on a technicality, despite the judge describing him as evasive and untruthful. The public outcry was immediate. The appeals court upgraded the conviction to murder. His sentence was extended to 13 years and 5 months. He was paroled in January 2024 after serving roughly 9 years. The South African system was initially wrong, and then it corrected itself through its own mechanisms. That matters enormously, because in the OJ case, there was no correction mechanism. You can't appeal an acquittal in the American system. In Italy, in 2007, a British exchange student named Meredith Kircher was found sexually assaulted and stabbed to death in Perugia. Her American roommate, Amanda Knox, was interrogated without a lawyer for 53 hours and convicted of the murder twice, before the Italian Supreme Court definitively acquitted her in 2015, citing stunning flaws in the investigation. The man whose DNA was literally everywhere at the scene, Rudy Guade, served 13 years. The mechanism of failure was identical to OJ's case. A media narrative overtook the actual evidence so completely that the prosecution built their case around the story rather than the facts. In OJ's case, the narrative helped the guilty go free. In Knox's case, it sent an innocent person to prison. Some machine. Opposite injustice. And then there's Chris Watts, August 2018, Frederick, Colorado. An oil field worker who strangled his pregnant wife Shanann, smothered his daughters Bella and Celeste, drove to a remote oil site, buried Shanann in a shallow grave, and forced each daughter's body into a separate oil storage tank. Then drove home, texted his wife's phone, gave television interviews on his porch saying, "My kids are my life. Those smiles light up my life." Arrested 3 days later. Pleaded guilty. 5 consecutive life terms without parole. The entire case was resolved in under 3 months. Sit with that contrast. Watts had no money, no fame, no legal architecture, no institutional grievance to weaponize. The system processed him completely in 90 days. OJ Simpson, with $6 million and the LAPD's documented history behind him, spent 30 more years free, played golf, published a hypothetical confession, got paroled from an unrelated conviction, joined TikTok, died with everyone in his room under NDA. The question this forces you to ask is, what would a justice system look like, where the outcome didn't depend on how much money the defendant had, how credible the institution was, and what the cultural moment happened to be? I genuinely don't know, but I think the pattern demands we keep asking. Here's one concrete thing the data shows. Nicole Brown Simpson's murder helped catalyze the passage of the Violence Against Women Act. VAWA was the first comprehensive federal legislation making domestic violence a federal crime. It had been stalled in Congress for months. Nicole's sister, Denise Brown, testified before Congress in support of it while it sat in committee. It was signed into law in September 1994, the same year Nicole was killed. The National Domestic Violence Hotline launched in 1996, 75,000 calls in its first year. Last year, more than 400,000 calls, texts, and messages. The rate of intimate partner homicide of women has declined by more than 50% since VAWA passed. And simultaneously, in the same case, the man the evidence overwhelmingly shows committed those murders lived for 30 more years, accumulated over $100 million in unpaid debt, died requiring everyone in his room to sign an NDA. Both of those things are true. At the same time, in the same case, that's the part I keep coming back to. Here's where I land after all of this. Nicole Brown Simpson was 34 years old. She had a rooftop sun deck. She had plans for the summer. She was on the phone with her friend the day before she died, making plans for a lunch where she was going to say something important. Ron Goldman was 25 and dropping off someone's forgotten glasses on his way home from work. Just a simple act of kindness that cost him everything. Those are the two facts at the center of 30 years of noise. They were alive, then they weren't. And all of it, the trial, the verdict, the gloves, the Bronco, the book, the NDAs, came from one thing. What happened on that walkway on that Sunday night? Fred Goldman has spent 30 years fighting in courtrooms. His daughter, Kim Ron's sister, spent 16 years running a nonprofit, providing free crisis counseling to teenagers, founded the Ron Goldman Foundation for Justice, testified before Congress, wrote books, hosted a podcast, and gave her brother a public voice for 3 decades because the trial never gave him one. As of November 2025, the Simpson estate accepted the Goldman family's creditor claim for nearly $58 million. Actual expected payout after taxes and fees, somewhere between $100,000 and $300,000. 30 years, $33.5 million ordered, roughly $200,000 expected. That's where this ends. I needed to tell you all of this, every piece of it, because I think the version of this story most people know is actually OJ's story, the race debate, the dream team, the glove, the verdict. But underneath all of it, there's a woman who kept a safe deposit box because she knew what was coming, and a young man who put a pair of glasses in an envelope because he was kind. And I think they deserve to be the center of the story, not the edges. Thanks for staying with me on this one. If this hit you the way it hit me, share it, talk about it, drop a comment. Kim Goldman's foundation is still active. Nicole's sister Denise runs the Nicole Brown Charitable Foundation. Their work is ongoing and worth your attention. I'll see you in the next one.